"I swear I'll be gentle," the giant cowboy promised the lonely black widow. The dust never settled in Red Mesa. It clung to everything like the whispers that followed Eulalia Harper through the narrow streets. Children scattered when she approached the general store. Mothers pulled their young ones close and crossed themselves. The devil widow had come to town. Eulalia kept her chin high as the shopkeeper turned his back to her. She placed her coins on the counter anyway. He swept them into his palm without looking at her face. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The walk to the river took longer than it should have. Eulalia carried 2 wooden buckets that knocked against her legs with each step. The town well stood in the center of the square. Clean water, close to her cabin, but not for her, never for her. At the riverbank she knelt on the smooth stones. Her reflection wavered in the moving water. 2 husbands dead, both buried in the cemetery that overlooked the town, both blamed on her presence in their lives. The sound of hooves made her look up. A shadow fell across the water. The horse seemed too small for its rider. The man towered above her even while seated. His hat brim cast darkness over his face. Bartholomew Radcliffe had ridden into Red Mesa an hour before sunset. The townspeople had stared, whispered, pointed. His size made strong men step aside. His quiet voice made them lean forward to listen. The saloon keeper had charged him double. The room he received had a broken window and a door that would not lock. Bear paid without complaint. He had seen worse treatment in other towns. Now he sat watching the woman everyone feared. She filled her buckets with steady hands, no trembling, no hurried movements. The dignity in her posture spoke louder than any words. Bear climbed down from his horse. Dust swirled around his boots as they touched ground. Eulalia glanced up but did not flee. Her dark eyes held intelligence, strength, nothing that matched the stories he had heard in town. He removed his hat. The gesture seemed to surprise her. "Ma'am, I hear tell you might need some help with repairs around your place. I swear I'll be gentle with your property." His voice carried the softness of distant thunder. Eulalia studied his face, weathered skin, kind eyes, hands that could crush stone but held his hat like it might break. "Folks say different things about gentle men in this town." Bear nodded toward her cabin visible through the cottonwoods. "Folks say different things about a lot of matters. I prefer to see for myself." Hoofbeats approached from town. Multiple riders. Eulalia's shoulders tensed. Bear turned to face the sound. His hand did not move toward his gun. It did not need to. Hiram Bostwick led 4 men toward the river. His horse pranced beneath him like it knew its rider owned half the territory. His eyes fixed on Bear with the look of a man used to getting his way. "Stranger, you picked poor company for conversation." Bear stood between Hiram's horse and Eulalia. The positioning was not accidental. His massive frame cast a longer shadow as the sun dropped lower behind the hills. "Company seems pleasant enough to me," Bear said. His voice remained steady, calm, the kind of calm that made smart men think twice. Hiram's horse shifted under him. The animal sensed tension its rider tried to hide. "You don't understand the situation here, friend. That woman brings misfortune. 2 husbands dead, crops failing wherever she walks, children taking sick after she passes by." Eulalia rose from the riverbank. Water dripped from her hands back into the current. She said nothing. Her silence carried more weight than any defense. "Seems like a lot of blame for one person," Bear observed. "Facts are facts. Ask anyone in town." Hiram gestured toward Red Mesa. "She's poison in a pretty package. You do well to ride on before her curse touches you too." Bear picked up one of Eulalia's water buckets. The handle disappeared in his grip. "I'll take my chances." The threat in Hiram's eyes sharpened. His men shifted in their saddles. Hands moved closer to weapons. Bear noticed everything. The nervous twitch in the second rider's jaw. The way the third man's horse favored its left foreleg. The fourth rider's reluctance to meet anyone's gaze. "This is your only warning, stranger." "Obliged." Bear lifted the second bucket. "Ma'am, shall we head back?" Eulalia walked beside him toward her cabin. Neither looked back at the mounted men. The sound of hooves eventually faded into the distance. The next morning brought whispers that spread faster than wildfire. The giant stranger was under the devil widow's spell. She had bewitched him at the river. Soon he would meet the same fate as her husband's. Bear appeared at Eulalia's cabin door before the sun cleared the mountains. He carried a leather tool satchel and wore work clothes instead of riding gear. The loose boards on her porch had not fixed themselves overnight. "You don't need to do this," Eulalia said through the partially opened door. "Porch won't repair itself." She watched him work from her kitchen window. His movements were precise, efficient. No wasted motion despite his size. When he needed a smaller nail, he selected it without looking. When a board required gentle pressure, he applied exactly the right amount. By midday, curious townspeople had gathered at a distance. They pretended to conduct business while stealing glances at the cabin. The blacksmith lingered longer than necessary outside his shop. The preacher found reasons to walk past 3 times. Bear worked through their stares. He had felt similar attention in other towns, fear mixed with fascination, the urge to watch something they could not understand. Eulalia brought him water at noon. She set the glass on the porch rail and retreated to the doorway. "They're watching. Let them watch. They think you're under some kind of spell." Bear tested the strength of a repaired board with his boot. It held firm. What kind of spell would that be? The kind that makes men do foolish things. Eulalia's voice carried a note of sadness. "The kind that gets them hurt." Bear looked at her directly. "You strike me as educated, well-spoken. Nothing foolish about treating someone with basic courtesy." The observation surprised her. Most people in Red Mesa had forgotten she possessed any intelligence beyond brewing trouble. "I taught school back in Missouri. Before I married." "What subjects?" "Mathematics, literature, some legal studies." She paused. "My father believed women should understand the law, said knowledge was the only protection that couldn't be taken away." Bear nodded toward the law books visible through her open door. "Wise man." Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. The general store owner walked up the path with deliberate slowness. His face carried the expression of a man delivering bad news he secretly enjoyed. "Ma'am." "Sir," he addressed them both but kept his distance from the porch. "Folks in town are getting concerned about the situation here." "What situation is that?" Bear asked. "Well, the association. People are starting to talk about consequences." Eulalia's hands tightened on her apron. She had heard similar warnings before. They always preceded increased hostility, sometimes worse. Bear set down his hammer. The sound echoed off the porch boards like a judge's gavel. "What kind of consequences?" The store owner's confidence wavered under Bear's steady gaze. "Just concerns about the natural order of things. How the town operates. Seems to me the town operates on fear and gossip. Now see here, we're good Christian people. We look out for each other. By leaving a woman to carry water from the river instead of using the town well," the accusation hung in the air between them. The store owner's face reddened. He had not expected direct confrontation. Most strangers listened to warnings and moved along. "That's different, the situation is complicated." "Complicated how?" But the store owner was already backing away. He muttered something about people not understanding local customs and hurried back toward town. Bear returned to his repairs. Eulalia remained in the doorway. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her property. In the distance, Red Mesa shimmered like a mirage that might disappear if examined too closely. "They won't give up," she said quietly. Bear drove another nail home with 3 precise strikes. "Neither will I." The words carried a promise that settled over the cabin like evening calm. For the first time in months, Eulalia allowed herself to believe that someone might actually stay. The wind picked up as evening approached. It carried the scent of dry grass and something else. Something that made Bear look toward the hills behind Eulalia's cabin. Smoke. 3 of Hiram's men rode along the ridge. They moved slowly, deliberately. One carried a burning torch despite the daylight. They were not trying to hide their presence. Bear watched them through the cabin window. Eulalia stood beside him. Her face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "They're heading for the brush pile behind my garden, the one I've been meaning to clear." The brush pile sat 20 yards from her cabin, dry branches and dead grass stacked shoulder high, perfect kindling in the wrong hands. The wind would carry any flame straight toward her home. How long has it been there? 2 months, since the last storm brought down that old oak. Bear studied the rider's positions, the wind direction, the distance from cabin to pile. Everything pointed to deliberate calculation. This was not random mischief. "Get your important papers, anything you cannot replace." Eulalia moved toward her bedroom. Bear stepped onto the porch. He could see townspeople gathering in the distance. Word traveled fast in Red Mesa, especially word about potential disasters involving the Devil Widow. The first wisps of smoke rose from the brush pile. The men on the ridge sat their horses like spectators at a show. They made no effort to hide their involvement, no attempt to fight the flames they had started. Bear walked toward the fire with measured steps. Behind him, Eulalia emerged with a small wooden box clutched against her chest. The wind gusted stronger. Flames licked higher into the evening air. The townspeople arrived in groups. Some brought buckets. Others came empty-handed. A few openly smiled as they watched smoke billow from the Devil Widow's property. The preacher stood among them with his hands folded. He made no move to help. Bear reached the brush pile as flames began jumping to nearby grass. The fire moved faster than walking speed. In minutes it would reach Eulalia's vegetable garden. In 10 minutes her cabin could be burning. He turned to face the crowd. 40 people stood watching, some eager for disaster, others uncertain but unwilling to act, all waiting to see what would happen next. Bear's eyes moved across their faces. The blacksmith avoided his gaze but gripped his bucket tighter. The doctor's wife shifted nervously. The saloon keeper crossed his arms and smirked. Each person's posture told a story, their true feelings written in stance and expression. "Fire's spreading toward the cabin," Bear announced. His voice carried across the open ground. "Going to need help stopping it." The saloon keeper laughed. "Maybe the curse will burn itself out." Bear ignored him. He focused on the blacksmith. The man's shoulders were broad, his hands strong from years of forge work. More importantly, he looked ashamed. "Could use someone who knows how to work hard." The blacksmith glanced at the other townspeople, then at his bucket, then at the flames spreading toward Eulalia's garden where she grew vegetables that fed the stray cats everyone pretended not to notice. He stepped forward, the doctor's wife followed, then the baker. One by one, people moved toward the fire, not everyone, but enough. Bear organized them with quick gestures. Water carriers here, dirt throwers there, blanket beaters along the perimeter. He positioned each person where their skills would do the most good. The blacksmith's strength, the doctor's wife's steady nerves, the baker's attention to detail. What amazed them was how Bear seemed to know exactly what each person could do best. He read their capabilities like text on a page, placed them where they would succeed rather than fail. The fire fought back. Wind gusts sent sparks flying toward new patches of dry grass. Flames reached higher than a man's head. Heat drove the volunteers backward twice, but Bear's calm direction kept them organized, focused. Eulalia worked alongside them. She knew her property better than anyone, which areas burned hottest, where the wind would shift next, where to dig fire breaks for maximum effect. Her intelligence became obvious as she anticipated problems before they developed. The townspeople began looking to her for guidance about her own land. The woman they had feared for months was now directing their efforts to save her home. The irony was not lost on anyone. As flames finally died down to smoldering ash, Bear surveyed the volunteers. Sweat and soot covered their faces. Their clothes reeked of smoke, but something else had changed. They looked at Eulalia differently now. She had fought beside them, worked as hard as anyone to save what was hers. The saloon keeper and a few others had never moved from their watching positions. They scowled at the successful firefighting effort. The disappointment in their faces revealed what they had hoped would happen. Hiram's men still sat their horses on the ridge. They had expected to watch a cabin burn. Instead, they had witnessed the town working together. Their torches had backfired in ways they had not anticipated. Bear walked toward the cabin as the volunteers dispersed. Behind him, several townspeople lingered to help Eulalia assess the damage. The blacksmith offered to repair her garden fence. The doctor's wife invited her to church Sunday. Small gestures, but significant ones. Eulalia joined Bear on her porch as darkness settled over Red Mesa. The crisis had revealed something unexpected. When forced to choose between cruelty and decency, more people had chosen decency than either of them had expected. "That was not accidental," she said quietly. Bear nodded toward the ridge where the riders had finally disappeared. "No, it was not. They'll try again." "Yes, they will." But something had shifted during the fire. The town's absolute unity against Eulalia had cracked. Seeds of doubt had been planted about who the real threat might be. The morning after the fire brought unexpected visitors. The blacksmith's wife arrived with fresh bread. The baker brought coffee beans. The doctor's wife carried wildflower seeds to replant Eulalia's burned garden. Small gestures from people who had crossed the street to avoid her for months. Bear watched the interactions from the porch. He noted how Eulalia's shoulders relaxed with each kindness, how her smile came easier than it had since he arrived in Red Mesa. The fire had burned away more than brush and grass, but not everyone approved of the changing attitudes. Hiram rode past the cabin twice before noon. His eyes lingered on the visitors, on the repair work continuing despite the damage, on Bear's steady presence that showed no signs of leaving. The saloon keeper made his feelings clear at the general store. His voice carried to the street where Bear loaded lumber into a borrowed wagon. "Folks getting soft, forgetting what she cost this town. 2 good men dead, crops failing, children taking fever." The store owner nodded agreement but kept glancing toward the window, toward Bear's imposing figure handling heavy boards like they weighed nothing. "Maybe things just happen sometimes," the blacksmith suggested quietly. "Maybe there ain't always someone to blame." The saloon keeper's face reddened. "You saying we been wrong all this time?" "I'm saying that woman worked harder than most to save her own place, and helped save others too." The argument continued as Bear finished loading. He had heard similar debates in other towns. When fear started losing its grip, anger rushed in to fill the empty space. People did not like admitting they had been wrong, especially about something as serious as persecution. That evening, Eulalia invited Bear inside for supper. The cabin's interior reflected her education. Books lined one wall, legal texts mixed with poetry and mathematics. A small writing desk held neat stacks of papers covered in careful handwriting. "You've been keeping records," Bear observed. "My father's advice: document everything. Dates, times, witnesses." Eulalia gestured toward the papers. "Every strange death, every accident, every time someone blamed my presence for their troubles." Bear examined her notes. The handwriting was precise, the details thorough. Dates and locations marked with mathematical accuracy. This was not the work of a grieving widow lost in superstition. This was systematic investigation. "Your first husband. Tell me about the day he died." Eulalia's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "Samuel was clearing brush on Hiram's north pasture, rattlesnake country. Everyone knows it, but Hiram sent him alone. No partner, no proper tools. Just a dull machete and orders to clear 2 acres before sunset." "Hiram's orders specifically?" "Samuel told me the night before. Said Hiram wanted that section cleared for new grazing. Seemed strange timing. Middle of snake season, but Samuel needed the work." Bear studied her notes about that day: weather conditions, time of death, location of the snake bite, the doctor's examination, everything documented with careful attention to detail. "Your second husband, Thomas." Eulalia's voice grew quieter. "He worked part-time at the general store. started noticing discrepancies in the medicine supplies. Bottles that should have been full were half empty. Labels that didn't match contents. Medicine tampering. Thomas thought someone was watering down treatments, selling the extra for profit. He planned to report it to the circuit judge. Eulalia pulled out another set of notes. Found dead the next morning. Horse supposedly threw him into the rocks by Miller's Creek. Bear examined the second incident's documentation. Again, precise details, witness statements, timeline of events, physical evidence descriptions, the work of someone who understood legal requirements for proof. But Thomas was an experienced rider. 20 years in the saddle. That horse was gentle as a lamb. Something spooked it that night. Or someone did. The pattern became clearer as Bear reviewed more of Eulalia's research. Both deaths had removed men who posed potential problems for someone with power in Red Mesa. Both had occurred at convenient times. Both had been quickly attributed to Eulalia's supposed curse. You've been investigating alone for months. Who would believe me? The devil widow claiming her husbands were murdered. Eulalia shook her head. I needed proof, real evidence, the kind that would convince a judge. Bear understood now why Eulalia had seemed so calm during the fire, why she had organized the firefighting effort with such precision. She was not a victim paralyzed by fear. She was a woman gathering ammunition for a war she intended to win. There's more. Eulalia pulled out a third folder. Other deaths, other accidents, all blamed on my presence but all benefiting the same person. The additional cases painted an even clearer picture. A county tax assessor who died in a riding accident the week before investigating Hiram's property valuations. A traveling merchant who disappeared after questioning Hiram's cattle brands. A bank examiner whose heart supposedly gave out during his review of Hiram's loans. He's been using you as cover for years. The perfect scapegoat. A woman everyone already fears. Every unexplained death becomes proof of my curse instead of evidence of his crimes. Bear leaned back in his chair. The scope of Hiram's operation was larger than he had imagined. Not just a greedy rancher eliminating competition. A systematic criminal enterprise using superstition as camouflage. We need more than documentation. We need witnesses willing to speak. That's the problem. Anyone who might testify ends up dead, or disappears, or suddenly changes their story. Bear thought about his own past, the cases he had solved not through violence but through psychology, understanding what motivated people to act, what scared them into silence, what might convince them to find courage. What if they felt protected? What if speaking up seemed safer than staying quiet? Eulalia studied his face. You have experience with this kind of situation. Some. Different town. Similar corruption. Bear gestured toward her research. But I never had an investigator this thorough working the case. Outside, night sounds settled over Red Mesa, crickets and distant cattle, the normal rhythms of a frontier town going to sleep. But inside the cabin, two people were planning to wake up secrets that powerful men wanted to keep buried. Dr. Marcus Webb arrived at Eulalia's cabin 3 mornings later. He approached on foot instead of horseback, his medical bag clutched tight against his chest like a shield. His eyes darted toward town every few steps. Bear met him at the garden gate. The doctor was younger than expected, maybe 35. His hands shook slightly as he removed his hat. Fear radiated from his posture like heat from a forge. I need to speak with both of you, about the deaths, about what I know. Eulalia emerged from the cabin. She had been expecting this visit ever since Bear suggested that guilt might eventually outweigh fear in certain people. The doctor's conscience had apparently reached its breaking point. Inside the cabin, Dr. Webb sat at Eulalia's kitchen table. His medical bag rested beside him, but he made no move to open it. Instead, he pulled out a leather journal from his coat pocket. The pages were filled with precise medical notation. I've been keeping records, real records, not the ones I filed with the county. Bear positioned himself where he could watch the door, old habits from his law enforcement days. Always know who might be coming, always have an escape route planned. Samuel Harper's death, Dr. Webb began. The snake bite was real, but it was not what killed him. Eulalia's hands tightened on her coffee cup. She had suspected, but hearing confirmation still hit like a physical blow. He was dying when they brought him to me, but slowly. The venom was working through his system. I could have saved him with proper treatment. The doctor's voice grew quieter. Hiram was there. He sent my assistant away, told me Samuel was already gone, insisted I pronounce him dead. But he was still alive, barely breathing. But yes, still alive. Dr. Webb opened his journal. I have detailed notes about his condition, pulse rate, breathing pattern, responses to stimulation, all proof he could have been treated successfully. Bear studied the doctor's face. The man was telling the truth. Guilt had been eating at him for months, maybe longer. Thomas Harper's death, no riding accident. Dr. Webb turned several pages. Blunt force trauma to the skull, but not from hitting rocks. The wound pattern was wrong, too focused, too precise. Eulalia set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Someone struck him, with something heavy, round, like a hammer or the butt of a gun. The doctor's hands trembled as he showed them his sketches. I drew everything, measured the wounds, documented angles and force patterns. Why didn't you report this? Dr. Webb laughed bitterly. To who? The sheriff works for Hiram. The mayor owes him money. The judge only comes through twice a year, and Hiram controls what cases reach his attention. Bear understood the doctor's position. He had seen similar corruption in other towns. When the system itself was compromised, honest men had few options. They could flee, stay silent, or end up dead. There are others, Dr. Webb continued. The tax assessor. Heart attack, they said, but I found bruising around his throat. Signs of strangulation. He flipped more pages. The bank examiner. Poisoning, not a weak heart. Each revelation confirmed what Eulalia's research had suggested. Hiram had been eliminating threats for years, using the doctor's complicity to falsify cause of death, using Eulalia's reputation to explain away the pattern of convenient deaths. What changed your mind about staying quiet? The fire. Dr. Webb looked directly at Eulalia. Watching you work alongside people to save your own home, seeing how they treated you afterward, I realized I was helping persecute an innocent woman while the real killer walked free. Bear leaned forward. You're willing to testify to all of this. If you can guarantee protection, if there's a real chance of stopping him. The doctor's voice strengthened. I became a physician to save lives. Instead, I've been covering up murders. I cannot live with that anymore. Eulalia pulled out her own research. She spread the papers across the table beside the doctor's journal. 2 separate investigations that supported identical conclusions. The documentation was overwhelming. We need the circuit judge, Bear said. Someone with authority to act on evidence like this. Judge Morrison comes through next month. For the quarterly court session. Dr. Webb studied their combined evidence. But Hiram will know if we send word ahead. He has people watching the telegraph office, the mail routes. Bear had anticipated this problem. Corrupt men always controlled communication channels. They survived by knowing about threats before threats could develop. What if the judge received an invitation he could not refuse? Something that required his immediate attention. Like what? Bear smiled for the first time since arriving in Red Mesa. Like a formal complaint filed by multiple citizens alleging systematic corruption. The kind of complaint that creates legal obligations for investigation. Eulalia understood immediately. A petition, with signatures, filed through proper legal channels. Exactly. Once filed, the judge has to respond, has to investigate, cannot ignore it without risking his own position. Dr. Webb looked between them. You think people will sign such a petition after being afraid for so long? Some will. Bear thought about the townspeople who had fought the fire, who had visited Eulalia with small kindnesses afterward, especially if they understand the alternative is living under Hiram's control forever. And if we can prove their signatures will be protected, Eulalia added. That speaking up is safer than staying silent. The three of them spent the rest of the morning combining their evidence: medical records, timeline documentation, witness statements, pattern analysis. By noon, they had built a case that would convince any honest judge. The question now was whether they could present it before Hiram discovered their alliance. The doctor's late-night visit would not go unnoticed for long. In a town the size of Red Mesa, secrets traveled faster than horses. But for the first time since arriving, Bear felt optimistic. They had evidence. They had a witness. Most importantly, they had a strategy that did not require violence or vigilante justice. Just truth presented through proper legal channels. Sometimes the system worked if you knew how to work the system. The town meeting drew the largest crowd in Red Mesa's history. Every seat in the community hall was filled. People stood along the walls. Others pressed against windows from outside. Word had spread that something important was happening, something that would change everything. Hiram arrived fashionably late with his usual entourage. He expected to find a small gathering discussing mundane town business. Instead, he found a packed room buzzing with nervous energy. His confident stride faltered when he spotted Bear and Eulalia sitting at the front table with Dr. Webb. The mayor called for order, but his voice shook. He kept glancing at Hiram for guidance. This meeting was not following the usual script. Too many people, too much tension, too many variables outside anyone's control. Eulalia rose to address the crowd. The room fell silent. Many had never heard her speak in public before. They expected either timid whispers or wild accusations. Instead, her voice carried the authority of an educated woman presenting facts to reasonable people. Friends and neighbors, for months you have blamed me for tragedies that have befallen this town. Tonight I want to show you who is really responsible. She laid out the evidence methodically. Samuel's death presented as murder disguised as accident. Thomas killed for discovering medicine tampering. The pattern of convenient deaths that always benefited one man. Her presentation was calm, logical, devastating. Dr. Webb stood next. His medical journal provided proof that could not be disputed. Detailed documentation of falsified death certificates. Evidence of wounds that did not match official explanations. Testimony of being forced to lie about causes of death. I have been complicit in covering up murders. I cannot live with that burden anymore. Bear remained seated, but his presence anchored the proceedings. His calm confidence gave others courage to listen, to consider possibilities they had been afraid to contemplate, to question assumptions they had accepted without examination. Hiram finally found his voice. This is preposterous. The ravings of a disturbed woman and a frightened doctor. Everyone knows what she is, what she brings to this town. What I brought to this town was inconvenience to your plans. Eulalia's response was sharp but controlled. Every death blamed on my curse was actually elimination of someone who threatened your control. The crowd began murmuring. Connections were being made. Questions were being asked. The absolute certainty about Eulalia's guilt was cracking under the weight of evidence. You have no proof of these wild accusations. Eulalia smiled for the first time that evening. Actually, I do. The doors at the back of the hall opened. Judge Morrison entered with two federal marshals. His presence changed everything. This was no longer a town meeting. This was a legal proceeding with real consequences. Bear had sent word 3 days earlier through channels Hiram did not monitor. A traveling merchant loyal to nothing, but money had carried the message to the territorial capital. The evidence had been compelling enough to warrant immediate investigation. Judge Morrison took control of the proceedings with practiced authority. This court is now in session. I have reviewed preliminary evidence of systematic criminal activity in Red Mesa. We will hear testimony and examine proof. Hiram's face went pale. His men shifted uncomfortably near the doors but made no threatening moves. Federal marshals carried different weight than local intimidation tactics. This was beyond Hiram's ability to control or influence. The testimony continued for 2 hours. Dr. Webb presented his medical evidence. Other townspeople came forward with observations they had been afraid to share. The blacksmith testified about suspicious orders for tools found at crime scenes. The store owner admitted to being pressured to falsify inventory records. Each piece of evidence built upon the others. A comprehensive picture of corruption emerged that could not be dismissed or explained away. Hiram's empire of fear began crumbling as people found courage to speak truth. The breakthrough came when the telegraph operator revealed he had been saving copies of messages Hiram thought were destroyed. Communications with criminal contacts in other territories. Orders for specific actions against perceived threats. Written proof of conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Morrison called for a recess while he examined the physical evidence. When court reconvened, his decision was swift and final. Hiram Bostwick, you are under arrest for multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and corruption. You will be transported to the territorial capital for trial. The marshals moved forward. Hiram's men made no attempt to interfere. Some seemed relieved that their involvement was finally ending. Fear had kept them loyal. With fear removed, loyalty evaporated quickly. As Hiram was led away in chains, he turned toward Eulalia with desperate fury. This is not over. People like you do not win. People like me already have. The crowd erupted in voices, some cheering, some crying, some simply stunned by how quickly their world had changed. The woman they had blamed for everything was revealed as the victim of an elaborate deception. The man they had trusted was exposed as a calculating killer. Over the following weeks, Red Mesa transformed. Eulalia was formally cleared of all suspicion. The townspeople who had shunned her worked to make amends. Her cabin became a gathering place for people seeking advice on legal matters or simply wanting to learn from someone who had never lost faith in justice. Bear accepted the position of town sheriff. His gentle strength became exactly what Red Mesa needed to heal from years of living under Hiram's shadow. His promise to be gentle had evolved into a philosophy that guided the entire community. Dr. Webb resumed practicing medicine with renewed purpose. His courage in speaking truth had saved not just individual lives but the moral soul of the town. He established the first real medical practice Red Mesa had ever known. The community learned that assumptions based on fear were dangerous. That scapegoating the innocent allowed real evil to flourish unchallenged. That dignity and intelligence could triumph over prejudice when people chose to listen rather than judge. Eulalia and Bear worked together to build something better than what had existed before. Their partnership had begun with a promise of gentleness and grown into a foundation of mutual respect that lifted everyone around them. Red Mesa became known as a place where justice mattered, where people were judged by their actions rather than circumstances, where the courage to stand up for what was right was valued above conformity to fear. The Devil Widow had become the town's moral compass. The dangerous drifter had become their protector. Both had found home in the most unlikely place by refusing to let others define their worth. Truth had indeed proven more powerful than prejudice. Justice had prevailed through patience and dignity rather than violence, and gentleness had conquered fear through the simple act of treating people with the respect they deserved. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.